Great. Welcome, everyone. We are here at Netroots Nation 2021. My gosh, I've been attending Netroots, I believe, since 2014. So it's a real honor to be here yet again with you all for a very important topic. We are here to join in the fight against the student debt crisis. And I think an even better thing to say is we're here all together to cancel student debt, right? We know that that's been really big advocacy lately, and very important. This is a space near and dear to all of our hearts, and we're here today to hopefully help you learn how to take care of your own student debt a little bit, but also learn how to join us in this fight so we can cancel student debt for everyone. So with that, we can move along on the slides. I'm joined by some really wonderful people and really great friends of mine as well. So we have Sabrina Calazans. Sabrina works with us at Student Debt Crisis. And forgive me, my name's Natalia. I always forget to introduce myself. My name's Natalia Abrams, and I'm the president and founder at Student Debt Crisis Center. We are an organization with more than 2 million student loan borrowers, parents, and people that just care about the issue of student loan debt. And with me is our great organizing associate and borrower outreach coordinator, Sabrina Calazans. Sabrina, we have you.
I'm here. Welcome.
Sabrina is very used to me forgetting to introduce myself. We also have Samantha or Sam Singh, the legislative manager and policy advisor at Next Gen California. Next Gen has worked tirelessly on student debt issues here in the state of California and has also joined us in the fight to cancel student debt. Sam, do I have you on?
Yeah, hi everyone. Hi Natalia, thanks for the intro. We're a nonprofit advocacy organization, and we do focus a lot of our work in California legislation, grassroots partnerships, and civic engagement. And I also am the policy lead on all of our education work. And so definitely happy to be here with all of our great advocates and friends fighting against the student debt crisis.
Thank you, Sam. And last, but certainly not least, we have Lindsay Clark. Lindsay is the director of external affairs at Savvy. And, you know, I'll let you say a little bit about Savvy, Lindsay, but one of the things we love is that working with you all is your dedication to also canceling student debt, but helping borrowers and meeting them where they're at. And that's just so important right now, especially as people are really afraid of what's going to happen next year. So thank you, Lindsay, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia, for having me. It's great to be here with Sabrina and Samantha. As Natalia said, my name is Lindsay Clark. I work for Savvy, which is a social impact tech startup based in Washington, D.C. And we essentially developed a tech platform to help borrowers better understand and manage their student loans and actually get enrolled in some of these programs. And so I've had the pleasure of working with Natalia and the Student Debt Crisis Center team for a couple of years now in our sort of outreach and grassroots efforts, and really appreciate the honor of being here with you all. So thanks, Natalia.
Thank you, Lindsay. And if we can have Ian Kuhn, who has been so wonderful helping us run the slides, move on. Thank you. So, you know, today we really want to talk about the landscape of what, you know, the crisis is and what the fight is. And just so you all know, this fight has been going on for over a decade now, and it's a super huge collective effort of more than, you know, gosh, we're up to like 400 plus nonprofit organizations, faith groups, grassroots, companies like Savvy that are all engaged in this fight to cancel student debt. And through, you know, on the ground, but a lot of digital advocacy, we're seeing so much change. Also, just the amount of resources that, you know, we try to provide all of the groups here on this call to borrowers to help them. You know, it's so important for us that borrowers take care of their financial situation while we fight to change the laws. And that's led to transformational campaigns. At Student Debt Crisis Center, we're one of the initial orgs that helped with the Higher Ed Not Debt campaign that's hosted at Generation Progress. That is a great organization that's been going on for 7 years that has brought together all these groups and continues to fight to this day. And what we are fighting is this horrible student debt crisis. And borrowers, you know, to the tune of you probably all heard the numbers, 45 million that host 1.8 trillion, that's trillion with a T, in student loan debt. This has only gotten worse by the pandemic, right? We've seen so many crises get expanded because of this awful pandemic that's happened, and we're still very much in it. And we've done survey after survey, actually with Savvy, that's just shown that borrowers are not ready to make payments again. Student debt is the #1 stressor in their life. You know, we were just talking to somebody before this call that went back to school later in life only to end up in default. And, you know, that's just not okay. And we have to stop that. And so with that, we want to just reiterate again for anyone joining that we want to kind of go through how to take action, what this crisis is, but also a little bit of, you know, education on how you can take care of your own debt or what's new in that space to help you out. Because there's been a lot going on. And with that, I'd like to turn to our panelists. And, you know, this is kind of a big question. And Lindsay, I'd love for you to, you know, start us off a little bit. But what is the state of student debt in the United States right now? Where are we at here in going on or in the middle of this pandemic? What are borrowers going through?
Yeah, certainly a big question. So I'm a student loan borrower myself. You know, I think the current state of student debt, I always like sort of say it's not necessarily about how much debt we have, but about the fact that borrowers and the student debt system make it so that it is so complicated and overwhelming to try to deal with your student debt, which sort of makes the burden of that debt, you know, 10 times worse. And I think that especially, you know, sort of as we're hopefully coming through a pandemic, but so many borrowers were impacted financially, you know, the burden of student debt became even more so. And I think even though payments have been paused for the last 2 years for most student loan borrowers, you know, I think you've seen that borrowers haven't financially gotten any better than they were before. And so to me, it really is sort of this burden that's beyond the numbers that sometimes is often invisible. But the fact that so many people have a tough time understanding the system, it's unnecessarily complicated. And so to be able to see a light at the end of the tunnel, know, is there any hope? Am I ever going to get out of this? Is something that seems just unrealistic for many people. And they're not able to really ever get there. And so I think that there's so much more beyond. I think, what are we at? 1.7 or 8 trillion right now in student loan debt. Those numbers are impactful, but there's a lot more that speaks behind that.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned this, and I just want to make sure we're being really clear with borrowers. What is this payment pause, and what does that mean to borrowers right now?
Yeah, and I'm happy, you know, Samantha, Sabrina, let me know if you want to jump in. So this payment pause went into effect back in March of 2020 under the CARES Act. And it essentially paused payments and waived interest. So payments at $0, interest 0%. For the majority of federal student loan borrowers out there. And that is now going to end January 31st of 2022, so the beginning of next year. So after roughly 2 years of not having to make a payment, come February of next year, student loan borrowers will have to resume making those payments. And I think, you know, Natalia mentioned the surveys that we've done. We've seen across the board and heard across the board that borrowers are just not prepared for that to begin. Financially, emotionally, mentally, you know, in any capacity. So that payment pause, I think, is going to be a huge obstacle as far as the payments resuming for borrowers, you know, coming up. But feel free if anyone else has anything to add.
Well, I was going to add, and Sabrina, I think you can speak a little to this, and Lindsay, feel free to jump in. But it's not just, you know, the payment pause. Possibly, I say possibly, right now it's going to turn on, but I will say as an advocate, we are fighting tooth and nail to not have them turned on since borrowers are not ready. But, you know, we've heard, borrowers have heard a lot about servicer changes and this mess going on. Sabrina, you know, can you speak to that a little bit of what is going on with student loan servicers right now?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of uncertainty in this whole thing. It's the uncertainty of whether payments are going to resume or who their loan servicer is going to be. We know that 3 loan servicers have said that they are stepping back from loan servicing. And so there's a lot of changes and a lot of unknowns, and people don't know what's going to happen. They're wondering, when the payments come back, who am I making this payment to? Who's going to look at my past payments and make sure that everything is, on track? We know that there are PSLF, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness program, that is going to be overhauled, but FedLoan, who is the servicer for that program, is stepping back. So what are borrowers supposed to do? And we're getting that question a lot. And I think we're just all wondering what's next. And it's a lot of uncertainty, unfortunately, and we don't have those answers yet. But we're looking for, some clarification, some guidance, so that we can help borrowers, get onto the right track. We know that historically, the student debt crisis has impacted communities of color, women, and low-income communities, and we really want to make sure that the people that are disproportionately impacted are getting as much help and information as possible. So that's something that's really near and dear to our hearts, and something that we really work towards getting the answers to help borrowers.
And, thank you both, Sabrina and Lindsay. I was thinking already, Sam, on to the next question. But Sam, that you've given a good overview of what's going on kind of federally. Sam, if you can speak, you do a lot of state work. And we get this question all the time of, how can states be engaged in this fight? What can states be doing to also help with these kind of big federal policies?
Sure. Yeah. States should absolutely be acting in this space and doing what they can to support borrowers. They definitely have the full legal authority to do so. And that's what we've been seeing across the nation, and definitely here in California. That's what we've been pushing policy-wise. And I'd say the current administration has taken a completely different approach to this as well, actually reaching out to states to see how the states can work with the federal government to do outreach, to support borrowers, and to really rein in abusive and predatory actors in the student loan servicing industry. Sort of what the states can focus on is certainly taking a look at this broken system and offer consumer protections that are definitely needed. The states can say how servicers are going to conduct business in their state, and how are they going to work with their borrowers in their state. So, especially here in California, we passed the Student Borrower Bill of Rights with everyone's help here, and many, I'm sure, that are watching, and our friends and allies that are tuning into Netroots. It was a huge push, but something that the state of California was able to do, so that way borrowers have rights. They are going to have transparency in how their loans are being handled, and servicers are going to be held accountable. So the states can do a lot in this space, policy-wise, but we also would like to see further outreach efforts and education and support for borrowers along their pathway here.
So glad you mentioned consumer protection. Something I always say is that even if we made college free and canceled all the debt tomorrow, there's still all these abuses, egregious abuses by student loan servicers that need to be dealt with, even if that was, everything else was taken care of. So that consumer protection point is really important, and very happy for AB, 376, too many bills. Just going back to federal for a second, because one of the questions we get asked a lot, and something we said we were going to talk about in this panel, and was mentioned at the top with COVID, but there's also the change in administrations. And so, Sabrina, I'll start with you. What has, changed in the past couple years, especially, we hear a lot about canceling student debt more than we did before.
Yeah, so I think pre-COVID, there wasn't much of a focus, or there wasn't this mainstream media, focus on student debt cancellation. It wasn't a really big thing. But I think once COVID hit, we really saw how it really impacts families, and thinking about how families would have to pay their rent or pay their student loan debt is a question that we should never have to make anyone ask themselves. So we saw that it was really impacting families, and that student loan debt is something that it's immoral. It's someone is seeking to get higher education and to better their lives, but the student loan debt is causing a burden that is holding people back. People aren't able to buy homes. They're not able to invest in their families and their futures, and they're not able to pursue their dreams. Our economy suffers because of it. Our communities suffer because of it. And our lawmakers need to connect and listen to their constituents, because people are suffering. This is a real issue. And as we say, 1.8 trillion, 45 million borrowers, but it's not just the borrowers, it's their families, it's their local economies, it's the larger national economy. And so I think I've been so grateful to see how after COVID and after the presidential election in 2020, we saw how it became a part of the platforms and how presidential candidates started talking about student loan debt as a major issue. And we know that President Biden ran and talked about debt cancellation. And so that's why we fight for it. We fight for broad-based debt cancellation because that's a promise that he made to borrowers, and he has to keep that promise. And he's made promises to change the PSLF system, and they're working on overhauling that system. And they've made about $9.5 billion in debt cancellation, and that helps defrauded borrowers and disabled borrowers, but that's less than 1% of the total number of borrowers. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, we're very pleased and we're grateful that people are getting that relief, but that's barely scratching the surface, and a lot more needs to be done.
And Sabrina, didn't President Biden promise, or candidate Biden promise to cancel student debt?
He did. He promised that he would cancel up to $10,000 for everyone, and that he would eliminate debt for those making less than $125,000 and for those that went to HBCUs and MSIs. So these are promises that we are keeping Biden accountable for, and we're not going to stop fighting and advocating for millions of borrowers.
I want to get back to this, but you mentioned something, and it keeps getting mentioned, about public service loan forgiveness and this overhaul. And I can't think of anyone better to have on this panel than Lindsay Clark to discuss this. Lindsay, can you discuss this big news that happened this past week?
Sure. So the Department of Education announced that they would be introducing what they're calling a public service loan forgiveness temporary waiver. And so for basically the next year, up until October 31st of 2022, they are sort of changing the game when it comes to public service loan forgiveness and expanding the eligibility. So maybe I'll start with what it used to take to become eligible for this program. So there's sort of three things that you needed. You needed to, first and foremost, work for a qualifying employer. You needed to have the right loan type, a direct loan, and you needed to be on a certain type of repayment plan, an income-driven repayment plan. So all three of these things simultaneously you needed in order to qualify for this program. What we saw was that public service loan forgiveness began in 2007. So 2017, about 10 years later, was the first year that borrowers could start applying for the program. And over 100,000 people applied, and 99% were rejected. Why? Because many of them didn't have the right loan type. They weren't on the right type of repayment plan, not for their own wrongdoing, but because they simply were unaware of these technicalities that existed. And so what the Department of Education has just recently announced is sort of an overhaul to those technicalities. So now if you have made 120 payments working in a public service capacity for a qualifying employer, you are going to be eligible to qualify for forgiveness, regardless of your loan type, regardless of your repayment plan. And this is, for those of us who've been working really closely with public service loan forgiveness, huge. And we are very glad to see the program being finally, I think, living up to the promise that it made. Let's just be clear about that. This was sort of a promise made to borrowers from the beginning, that if they worked for 10 years, they could have their debts forgiven. And the minutia of all of that was really where it fell short, and being able to actually have people get their debt forgiven. And so this is, again, something that is long overdue. We are really excited about, but this will open up the pool of eligibility. So for many borrowers, this is going to be automatic. In the next couple of weeks, they will receive notices that their debts are being automatically canceled. For other borrowers, they're going to need to take some action. They're going to need to potentially consolidate their loan to become eligible, or they might need to certify one last payment. But it will bring roughly 500,000 or so borrowers either closer to forgiveness or already basically at the point of forgiveness in the coming months. So we're really excited about these changes. Hope that they there are more to come with this. But this is sort of big news on the public service loan forgiveness portion.
Yeah, It's really, I think, long overdue is the right way to put it. This is something that borrowers were promised and did receive, very similar to the for-profit schools as well. I think we're excited for those that are going to receive it at Student Debt Crisis Center, but we know that it's still, as Sabrina kind of mentioned, it's not all borrowers, right? We still need to do something to take care of all borrowers, but we can't, something we've been saying around the office is like, we want to cancel debt whenever and wherever we can. We're not going to be mad about any debt being canceled. And actually, just to quickly go to a question, it seems like we have a question from an audience member. Hillary says, thank you for mentioning the next year. Does the expansion include all types of loans, and does it expire?
Sure. So the expansion includes direct loans, direct consolidated loans, and then some non-direct loans. So those would be Perkins loans and FFEL loans, FFEL loans, which stands for Federal Family Education Loans. So those are the loans that are now all included and eligible, and it does expire. So this temporary waiver period in which to sort of apply for this expires October 31st of 2022. So hopefully that answers your question, Hillary.
Great. And I think, that FFEL thing has been a big problem. I will say, for anyone listening, if you have been denied in the past or even denied for temporary public service loan forgiveness, I implore you to check it out again. You can contact us at Student Debt Crisis Center. You can contact Lindsay at Savvy. We are, actively trying to find as much debt as we can to cancel. So this may be applicable to you, even if you felt like it wasn't before. And my gosh, this stuff just takes so much stress and takes a lot to deal with. And I'd be remiss, something we just talked about recently at a previous conference was the mental health impacts of student loan debt and how that is like a #1 stressor for folks. Sam, this is something we were so honored to have you moderate a panel for us. Can you talk a bit about the mental health impacts for student loan borrowers, or that student debt has on us?
Yeah, thanks. And I was very honored to talk to some experts in the field there, a practitioner and borrowers going through this. I think what we've been hearing from these experts and borrowers themselves across the board is that this kind of debt takes a physical and mental toll on folks, manifesting in ways of depression, fear of future, and even thoughts of suicide. This is a very heavy burden. There's a lot of, moral language tied around debt, a stigma to it. And it traps students in their academic progression as well. And I think someone has already mentioned, but it's the #1 stressor for Americans is financial stress. So this is, student debt has a burden and implication for borrowers beyond, the academic, the financial aspects, the economic aspects, because borrowers, they are basically surviving in a broken system is what they need to remember, is what we've been hearing too from these experts. And the mental health toll on borrowers also falls along racial disparities. We know that the crisis itself disproportionately impacts, I think Sabrina said, people of color. We know that especially Black students carry the most, end up with the most, default, especially women as well. So the mental health toll on those borrowers, is desperate there too. This is it's a very serious crisis that I think, calls for more policy solutions.
And Sam, just to follow up, because it just feels wrong to not talk about this with solutions, what can borrowers do, if they feel that they're struggling?
Definitely. And this is this is just me taking quick tips from experts. So definitely seek, expert advice.
Yes, you're not a psychologist, sorry, just a preference, but you are very easy to talk to.
So, we definitely encourage to find someone that you can talk to. For students, that means looking towards your campus resources. There are, counseling centers, hopefully, student affairs offices, crisis lines, and really, yeah, just go find someone to talk to about this. And sharing your story is also something that we keep hearing. One, not just as a great advocacy tool, and I'm sure we'll get into that later, but there is a healing power in community. And just knowing, that you're not alone in this kind of, unfortunately, is also, but that, again, this is a broken system that folks are surviving in on top of everything else. So, talk to other borrowers too. And I think it lifts the stigma off of that. And we should stop putting such a moral burden on borrowers too with this, and just remind yourself that, you are not your debt. This is a broken system that has systematically failed folks at every point, and folks that have been trying to do the right thing, trying to pay back their loans, but you can't if the system is failing you. So this is not your fault. You are not your debt, and join the fight against student debt crisis so you can take action and we can prevent this for future generations as well.
Yeah, one of the main reasons we share, at least at Student Debt Crisis Center, those big numbers of 45 million borrowers or 1.8 trillion is, kind of to paraphrase from another panelist I heard, 45 million borrowers can't all be wrong, right? They can't all have made these mistakes to be in this debt. So that leads to, this is a systemic problem, right? And you touched on something else, Sam, that I'd love to hear from you, Sabrina, is that, we do hear that Black borrowers and people of color and women are definitely disproportionately impacted. Sabrina, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so the group that's most impacted by student loan debt is actually Black women. They have to take out more debt, more student loans, and end up having more debt. We know that Black borrowers, after about 12 years of payments, have more debt than they originally had taken out compared to white borrowers. We know that student loan debt is widening the racial wealth gap. It's not helping the situation. It's already difficult for Black and brown families to create generational wealth. So this is stopping that from happening. Student loan debt is something that is holding people back from investing in their families, as I said earlier. And it's not just impacting young people. I know that we hear, oh, it's a young person issue, but that's not true at all. There are older borrowers. There are between 6.3 million borrowers between the ages of 50 and 64. And we know that many of them have student loan debt. It's millions and millions. And we know that for borrowers that are struggling and have Social Security, they can have their Social Security garnished if they default. We know that they're already struggling, and that is just one more thing, and that's so unfair and immoral. And we hear from borrowers all the time that after years and years of paying, their balance doesn't decrease, it just stays the same, or it just goes up. And I think it's a really frustrating situation. But I think from hearing the stories, we're able to build a community. And I've been seeing that like on our social media pages and things like that. I've been seeing people really reach out and feel comfortable. When someone shares a story, someone else, feels compelled to share a story too. And you feel a little bit less alone. As Sam said, if we create community, like it's just like a really powerful thing. And it's not just ourselves, but when we have those stories, we can also share it with our lawmakers and with policymakers. We were fortunate to have Senator Schumer and Rep. Ayanna Pressley and Senator Elizabeth Warren join our recent conference. And that was so impactful to see, our lawmakers coming in, connecting with us and having these conversations is so important. And when we connect with our policymakers, when we send letters, when we write petitions, when we take those actions, it really does make a difference, because it seems like, oh, it's just me writing a petition. But if all of us together wrote petitions, that starts accumulating to larger numbers, and it creates this sort of, it just grows the momentum. And I've been seeing that, and I think we can all testify to that. We've been seeing more and more people testifying and talking about it. And it's just really sad that it is such a big issue impacting people of all ages, because you would think that, at 65, you could retire and, you live a comfortable life. But unfortunately, it's really having an impact where people are saying, I can't afford to retire. I have to work 2 to 3 jobs because of my student loan debt. And that should not be the issue, because President Biden has the authority to cancel that debt.
Yes, I know. Sorry, like you leave me speechless, Sabrina. I think you really nicely led in and almost started to answer my next question, which I feel we've been talking a lot about what the crisis is, but how do we take action? How do we get help? And I want to start with you, Lindsay, with this payment pause. So if loans unfortunately get turned back on, and a borrower has, lost their job or had a depletion in hours, what can they do? Is there anything they can do right now, or do they need to wait until February?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have experienced any financial, been negatively impacted financially in any way, so maybe you lost your job, unfortunately, maybe your hours decreased, your wages decreased, I would highly encourage you to submit your income-driven repayment plan application right away. What you can do is, because of your decreased income and as low as potentially, if you're making $0 a month, you're unemployed, you could lock in a payment amount for as low as $0 a month. So when payments do resume in February, if they end up resuming, you would be on a $0 a month payment plan for the next 12 months. But you have to submit that application now in order to lock it in. If you waited and then let's say you got your job back in a month or so, you wouldn't be able to take advantage of it then. So this is something that all borrowers should know, just in general, as a way to protect themselves should they experience any type of financial downturn. But submitting that income-driven repayment plan, no documentation is needed, no supporting documentation for your income if you are unemployed, and you can lock in a $0 monthly payment. So I would say that's probably the first and foremost thing they want to think about, Natalia.
That's great. And, right now, I guess another update just to share is there is a process going on to reform these programs. We know they're not perfect, and they're not the, answer to everything, but we just want to make sure that borrowers don't fall into default or into harder times while, we're trying to figure out and change the laws. Sabrina, I just, would love if you could share a little bit about where sharing your story can lead. Because sometimes, there's community, there's feeling like you can express yourself. It's therapeutic to do that, but, it's not just going into a vacuum. So what happened when you shared your story?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2019 and I really struggled to find, a job, and I was unemployed. And then I took temporary jobs and worked at a summer camp and things like that. And I was just feeling frustrated. And I think after my grace period for student loans, and I got my first bill, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't afford that. And then I just started looking into like student debt, like different like petitions and things like that. And I like signed one, and then I filled out a survey, and it ended up being for a student debt crisis center. And then I got an email. It was like, can you share your story a little bit more? And then I shared, and then they sent me an email and said, would you like to potentially be in a meeting with the Secretary of Education, Senator Schumer, Senator Warren, and the president of the NAACP? And I was like, whoa, like I was not expecting that. And then I shared my story again. And, from there, it just really showed me why and how stories are so impactful. Like we never know where it will take us and who we're going to enter into contact with. So maybe you won't fill out a story, and get connected to the Secretary of Education, but, all of those thousands of stories, we were able to have a campaign called the Cancel Student Debt Voices campaign, where we collected over 13,000 stories and deliver that to policymakers and to the Department of Education. When they look at those stories and they see the different impacts, it makes a difference. When the Department of Education had the request for information for PSLF, more than 48,000 people made comments, and then they announced these overhaul changes to the system. It makes a difference, and we have to take action as much as we can, because in this time, it's hard for us to gather with COVID, and it's not that easy for us to all gather and do like a mass protest or, gather in large numbers, but virtually it's not impossible. And we have Zoom and we have other platforms that have made it easier for us to connect online. And so I suggest, if you can do it, get involved, sign the petition, send the letters. It really does make a difference. So that's that's my take. My story was a little bit different from the average survey story, but it really impacted me, and it really got me involved in all of this and seeing how it does impact people's lives. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
And besides sharing your story, Sam, can you speak to kind of ways in which we've won bills in the state of California? Because I think that helps that can be applied nationally as well. So what are other ways besides sharing our stories that we can get involved and take action?
Sure. I mean, it was the fight for the Student Bar Bill of Rights in California was a 2-year endeavor. And it was literally a team effort. So all across the board, every advocacy action really made a difference in pushing the bill over the edge finally in 2020. So we built, a very huge and diverse coalition of organizations, groups. I mean, some of these folks that you would not normally think would be interested in talking with, like, grassroots folks. So we got, national associations for, like, realtors, AARP got involved, so they're along the lines with student organizations, advocates. We got constitutional officers even joining the fight, because, again, it's more often than not that you're going to find someone with student debt. So even our lawmakers have student debt, but what is pivotal is making sure that they are hearing the experiences of borrowers today. I think what we heard a lot was, they had a very different college experience. So many times a lawmaker would just say, well, I took out, a student loan and I was able to work my way through college and pay it off. And, we have to, kind of update them and let them know, like, this is what's actually happening on the ground. The cost of living, the cost of attending college has skyrocketed. We need more state investments in these for sure. And for now, what's happened is this rise in the student debt crisis and the total that students that have to do in order to get a higher education. So, we did phone calls, letter writing campaigns, texting, going to social media, getting your story and getting the attention of these lawmakers to realize how widespread this issue is and how deep it goes. It does make a difference. And, pivoting into the pandemic, social media was the way to go. These lawmakers, as all of us, were probably on our phones, kind of scrolling through. And so if we get, 50, 100 borrowers starting to talk about one thing, it really makes a difference in your local government, at state, at least in state government. So that's really not too hard of a number to reach. I feel like you could call a couple of family friends and, get a couple of folks online. And it makes all the difference, because what you see also is we had this huge coalition and the bill was stalled because of 4 opposition groups. Just literally 4 entities opposed was enough to stall the bill, because lobbyists, special interests, these servicers have the money, they have the resources to talk to lawmakers. And of course, if that's all lawmakers are hearing from, then everything is fine. Servicing quality is, 100%. They're asking, they're helping borrowers with their student loans. Absolutely. And of course, we know that's not exactly the true narrative. So doing what you can to get your story across to lawmakers, whatever way you can. I know, not everyone can make it to a meeting, that you're working and you have life to deal with. So, anything you can do, a text message, a tweet, sign your name to an online petition, all of that stuff really matters, because there is a real power in numbers.
So I'm hearing we need to do all the things all the time. And just really keep pushing, don't give up. I think that was the story of our 2-year bill, that, like, even with very strong opposition, that we stayed together. We kept a coalition together for a couple years, which is really impressive. And everyone has their strengths, and we just kept pushing hard. Something unique that actually all the groups here have done on top of this kind of organizing are student debt workshops. And, that's something that we've had the honor of doing with Savvy for the last couple of years, and Next Gen Policy. Lindsay, can you speak to, what that's about, and I guess why we do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do it because while it is I mean, we couldn't push forward on policy without leaders like you and Samantha and Sabrina, who are actively fighting on the advocacy front. But in the meantime, borrowers need immediate help. They need to know what they should be doing, how to enroll in these programs. Just even raising that borrower IQ, as I call it, just a little bit, so that they can know things like if they ever become employed, they should resubmit their income-driven repayment plan and lock that in. These are, I think, the more that borrowers can become informed about this, the more that they are empowered as consumers. And so I think that's really, we start with that basis, right? And then I think they also provide opportunities for borrowers to connect in a intimate sort of safe space with experts, but also with other borrowers. So sometimes, I mean, our chat is akin to a therapy session in many instances where borrowers are talking to each other, supporting each other. But really it's a way for you all to get, and borrowers to get better information and understand these programs from experts, not necessarily their servicers who might have led them astray. And so that's really what the basis for those. And sometimes they have a specific topic like forgiveness. Sometimes we just do a broad general education, student loans 101. But we've been doing these, at least here at Savvy, we do these every day, multiple times a day, every week for years, as a way of, helping borrowers understand. Because I know that it was extremely powerful for me. My first one was a student debt crisis workshop, and that's what I'm here now 3 years later. So that's what they're kind of all about.
Yes, I think it's really important. We want to get this information out as much as possible. I'd like to think we're the groups that tell the truth about these programs. And unlike your servicer, where you can get 5 different answers if you talk to 5 different people, we're not, trying to profit off of your loan. We're just trying to help you understand it. Well, let's give folks a little taste of what a workshop is, because I do have another question from Hillary. And if anyone else has a question, please put it in the chat. But Hillary and Brooke seconded. Has there been any talk around smaller amounts of forgiveness per year? This is pertaining to public service work. Someone spent in 2 years working in public service but can't anymore. Is there any type of loan forgiveness for PSLF if you don't work the 10 years, I think is what Hillary's asking.
Yeah, happy to take this one. So unfortunately with public service loan forgiveness, there is not. However, there are some other types of forgiveness programs out there. I'm thinking of National Health Service Corps that is 2 years, where you have to live in a certain area and be working in a certain type of job. So they're a little bit more specific. And mostly pertaining to health workers or healthcare workers. But as far as this goes, no, but this would be a great, I think, potential improvement. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe candidate Biden talked about something like this when he was running, about ways to improve the public service loan forgiveness program. Maybe my colleagues know more about that.
I believe candidate Biden talked a lot about reforming all of the programs. I wish we could have candidate Biden right now. But yes, I believe, for IDR, it was reforming to something like 5%. And I know Representative Eric Swalwell has had a bill in the past that would kind of forgiveness as you go after 2 years, but that hasn't been passed yet. So that's, not enacted. I will say lawmakers are aware of that. One of the things that I like about this new PSLF overhaul is the fact that even if you've left public service but have worked those 10 years from 2007 to 2017, you can still apply. Also, if you've left public service and plan to come back in, you can, get some of that time counted for. So, Hillary and Brooke, this is just the beginning of the overhaul. And, this is a great example of sharing your specific experience and why there needs to be more to change those laws. And you'll continue to hear through us through the next 15 minutes, just the importance of sharing your story, because it really does, it has gotten us to the point we are. I will say just a little that at Student Debt Crisis Center, when we actually started with a batch of about 500 student debt stories that we had taken from when we were running Occupy groups. And it was those stories that made me want to do the work that I've done for the past decade. And that's grown. And at Student Debt Crisis Center, our story bank is over 80,000 strong. of student loan borrower stories. And every time we go into a meeting with a lawmaker, that just happened last week, they want to hear from a borrower from that state or from their district. So I won't be satisfied until we have, hundreds of people in each congressional district in order to be able to really fight this crisis. So it's that, collective voice or community, as Sabrina spoke about, that is really driving this fight. Again, I implore any of you to ask your questions. I hope, Hillary and Brooke, that we've helped answer it to a point. I know it's not the right answer, that there's this amazing program that's not out there yet, but we will continue fighting and take those points to the lawmakers that we work with. I want to switch a bit or keep on this how to take action, but Sabrina, I know you've been doing a lot of digital organizing lately. Do you have any tips for, those that are new to this or that want to be talking more online? And I know we heard from Sam about, tweeting out your local lawmakers, but yes, any tips, and feel free for anyone to jump in.
Yeah, I think tweeting at your senators or your representatives is like a great idea to get, that kind of attention on them and convincing them, to hear their constituent stories. I think it's so important to do that. I think on Instagram, I've been seeing it a lot more. I've seen so many different accounts that now are working in the realm of student loan debt. And I've seen a community there too, and they'll comment on our posts and we'll comment on theirs and try and share as much information as we can. And I think that really makes a difference, and it'll, as long as we're providing accurate information to borrowers and helping as many people as we can and just getting that message across, I think is just really important. And we've been seeing that, and we continue to do that. That's why when we, post on our stories and we're like, share this on your story, it's not, because it's a cute graphic, but it's because we want people to have the information. We really want it to get out there. We want people to understand and learn, from everything that, we've learned. And so I think that's really important. Sam, I know you work with Next Gen policy, and I know you guys have great tweets too, and things like that. So if you want to jump in, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add that, it's also great to hear folks, just kind of helping others figure out what's happening too. Once you start, getting tagged or included into a thread, on Twitter or something, and one person just starts asking questions, and then kind of the whole community comes together, and it's like, well, this is what happened to me. Does anybody have information about this? So like you said, it's advocacy and it's real time, borrower community at the same time. So it's been really great to see that happen.
And, I've seen too, just kind of I don't know if it's tips, but, at Savvy, you all do a good job, during our workshops or after the fact, of keeping the conversation going and, disseminating help through just social media. What's the best way you have found, that gets that help out to borrowers?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially given the pandemic and what that's done to borrowers, we always say this, right, Natalia, trying to reach people where they are at, right? Reaching borrowers where they are. And it's made it even harder. And by that, I mean, realizing that, when we give a workshop, someone might not be in the right headspace at that point in time, or it might be really overwhelming to try to consume this information, or they might have a ton of student debt, but for at least this is how I deal with my student debt, is to not think about it, right? So there are all these sort of mechanisms that people, I think, have developed to deal with their student debt, and trying to be able to reach a borrower where they are means understanding that you're going to have to provide many different ways. Maybe it's allowing them to, pick up the phone and have a phone call, or maybe it's just an email, or following up on that email, knowing that they're going to ignore it for a couple of times. I think it's trying to understand and really have a sort of human-centered perspective around the best way to deliver this help and to get people the help that they need. Because I think that student debt, just from my perspective, really impacts people differently. It's a beast all of its own, and different than other types of debt. And so from my perspective, it's been about trying to figure out the best ways to, like I said, deliver that to people, knowing that, you've got to maybe try a couple of times, or you've got to do it in a lot of different ways in order to get through.
And that's just stimulated another question. Thank you, Brooke. And thank you for shouting out one of our partners of all of our groups, Student Borrower Protection Center. We love them too. This is, to the group. So Brooke was one of the Stafford borrowers that had their credit impacted. And we've heard this actually from a lot of borrowers, that with the payment pause and other things going on, they've seen their credit scores move during the special forbearance period. I guess, Lindsay, have you seen that? Is there anything borrowers can do that have had their credit scores impacted?
I think the Student Borrower Protection Center is probably the best place to go to get help with something like that. We are not experts around the credit score stuff here at Savvy, but I think they are a tremendous support to anyone who might be experiencing that. But you've also got to be looking at your credit score and making sure, right? It's often no one's going to tell you necessarily that it was impacted. You might be the one to have to be monitoring that. So that would be my best advice, but I'm sure my colleagues might have more.
I'll say that from what we saw, it was all over the place. People were also having their credit score drastically improved during that time. This seemed to be more of a problem with the credit scoring companies than with the student loan companies. But yes, so it's not quite our specialty as well. Brooke also says that she was bummed. I'm sorry, they were bummed for that Perkins borrowers were not included. And, I guess, Lindsay, isn't there a way that Perkins could have been included for borrowers?
Well, I believe Perkins loans can be consolidated into direct loans. Yeah. So if you still have Perkins loans, they can be consolidated into a direct consolidation loan, and basically those loans would be eligible. So, what we've realized is like your loan type really matters around your eligibility for these programs. So that's something, Brooke, that we help borrowers to look into to make sure that, this is the right decision, how this is going to impact more broadly. But consolidation is a free federal process by which you are essentially creating a new direct loan. And so that's one way. I had older FFEL loans, commercial FFEL loans that were ineligible. By consolidating those, they are able to become eligible for things like the CARES Act relief, et cetera, as well as, broader other programs out there. So, feel free to reach out to us. We'll provide all of our contact information, but we're always willing to help borrowers.
And this brings up a really great point. Not all borrowers have had their loans on pause, correct?
Correct. Yeah. What would we say, about 6 million borrowers who had these commercial FFEL older loans that were, or Stafford that were not put on pause. Yep. And private loan borrowers. Many people have both private and federal loans, or just private. Those borrowers were also not able to take advantage of this payment pause. So they've had to continue to make their payments, which is, it's been a burden, right? It truly has. I speak personally.
Yes, I think, I know a bit about your loan situation and the type of interest that you pay daily, especially on those private loans. Nothing to laugh about. It came to mind, and I just keep thinking of defaulted borrowers. Is there anything, if you've already, sorry to keep putting you on the spot, Lindsay, but you are a resident student debt expert. So, anything for those that have fallen into default that are listening right now?
Sure. Well, so there's always been what's called default rehabilitation, which, basically, really, I say is a phone call away. Sometimes when people are in default, it seems like they're going to have to pay the whole thing back at once. And, that's not the case. But this default rehabilitation, basically, usually it takes about 9 months of payments. That we find a low reasonable payment, sometimes as low as $5 a month, to get that borrower back in good standing. And then their loan is back in good standing. You can also consolidate your way out of default, and that too gets you back into good standing. So this is something that borrowers in default shouldn't be scared that they're going to have to pay that full sum. I would say that from my experience in dealing with borrowers in default, the sooner you can get on that phone, and we actually do this with you, we call the collections agency, we figure out what the options are going to be, we get you on the right repayment plan to start getting that loan back into good standing, the better off you'll be. So sometimes it's just sort of, what should I say? Just doing it. I'm not thinking of the good metaphor here, but yeah.
Thank you. I think that's important because we don't want to forget those who are not included in the pause or those that have been in default, and there is definitely still help out there for you. So we only have a few minutes left. My gosh, this goes so fast when talking about student loan debt. Last call if anyone has any more questions, but I just would love to kind of go round robin and feel free to reiterate points, but what can borrowers do right now after watching this great workshop and all you three wonderful people talk about this? We'll start with you, Sabrina. What should borrowers be doing right now? How can they take action?
Right. If you haven't shared your story, I know that we have on our website, I know we have petitions and we have story sharing. There are links to story sharing as well if you haven't done that. And I think that the student loan crisis is so intersectional. There's so many different issues that are impacted with student loan debt. So if you're passionate about other issues such as gender equity or racial justice or economic justice or something along those lines, this is another issue that impacts that. So student loan debt is something that you can incorporate into that, activism or that advocacy that you do as well. If you take a look into it, it really does impact so many different aspects of life. So again, if you could share your story, if you could send a letter, whatever it is, whatever action you can take online is super important, or whether it's just having a conversation with your family and friends about their loan situation as well. And you'll find that people around you have student loan debt too. I think it's really hard for us to envision. It's not a conversation that we have all the time, but there are a lot more people, as Sam said, that have student loan debt than don't have student loan debt. So that's my suggestion.
And Sam?
Yeah, I'm gonna ditto Sabrina and kind of what we've talked about here today. If you have any means of communicating with your legislator, calling them, sending a text, doing a tweet, follow us and follow Student Debt Crisis, Student Borrower Protection Center. We're doing policy work in California at NextGen. Student Borrower Protection Center is doing policy work, federal level and at so many different states. So are you, Student Debt Crisis and Savvy. So, check out our website and our social media to see, different actions that you can take. There's petitions, so you can kind of fight at the federal level, fight at your local level, or reach out to us too if you want to start on something that should be taken care of. I'm going to go back to Hillary's suggestion. I know that in California, the thought of doing a state program like that is, something that's not unheard of. Nothing has really gotten started on it, but if you reach out to us and we'll start building a coalition, see what we can do to further support borrowers. And coming up in 2022, I'll just do a shout out for us. We're going to be doing fall student debt, Free My Future Student Debt Summit coming up November 17th through the 18th. To hear from borrowers, to provide free resources, especially give updates on PSLF and everything that's been happening. So come join the policy conversations with us there. Bring your ideas, bring your stories, and hopefully we can get some information for you that is going to be helpful. But again, just whatever action that you can take. I think Sabrina covered it. Please take the time to do that.
Thank you. And Lindsay,
to
wrap up with you.
Nothing more I can add other than to really attend that Free My Future. That's actually how Natalia, Samantha, and I first met each other. Well, you guys knew each other before, but it was a really special day, and looking forward to the future with you guys. So thanks for having me. And I think they said it best.
Well, I will say you'll be able to see Lindsay and our student debt help summit or help workshop more in action. So for those borrowers that are really concerned about what's coming up in February or what might come up, until we cancel student debt, like come learn how to take care of your student loan debt. We will have a longer workshop, which Lindsay will be back on with us to answer all your questions. So, and I'll just kind of do a plug for you, Lindsay. I think, one of the things is that folks can take care of their own student loan debt, and, email us if you'd like to connect with savvy folks and be able to use this great tool that they've provided so you can take care of your debt right now while we work to cancel it all in the future. And with that, we're really honored to be here at Netroots Nation yet again, Netroots 2021. Thank you, Sabrina Calazan, Samantha Singh, and Lindsay Clark for a really excellent, super fast conversation.
Thank you, Natalia. To you
Thank
as well.
you.
Thanks all.